Okay, for this deep dive, you've given us Anne Frank's diary. It's really more than just a historical document.
It is. It's a window into history, but
Okay.
but from a very personal perspective. It's like we're right there with her experiencing life under Nazi occupation in a way that textbooks just can't capture.
Yeah, and she wasn't trying to write like a textbook, was she? She was just a girl just writing in her
She's
diary.
just a teenager writing her thoughts and feelings. But then imagine, you're Anne. You're hiding, terrified, and you hear on the radio a government official pleading with people to document their experiences, specifically mentioning diaries. That's got to be a pretty powerful moment for a young writer, especially.
Oh, absolutely. It suddenly makes her diary into something much bigger, something important. And thankfully they were preserved.
Mupe Geese, one of the people who was helping the Franks while they were in hiding, she found the diary. After the family was arrested, she found the pages. And she knew they were important. She held on to them. And later, she gave them to Otto Frank, Anne's father, when he returned from the camps.
Oh, wow. I can't imagine what that must have been like for him to read his daughter's words, knowing what happened to her.
It's hard to fathom, but he saw the value in sharing her story with the world. Publishing the diary was an act of love and immense courage, ensuring that her voice wouldn't be lost.
It's amazing how her story has resonated with so many people for so long. But before we dive into the diary, maybe we should talk about her life before she went into hiding. She was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1929.
Yes, but her family, they had to flee to Amsterdam in 1933 to escape the Nazis. They were hoping for a normal life.
Right, but even that must have been a huge upheaval, leaving everything behind. It's almost like a foreshadowing of the even greater losses that were to come.
And the threat followed them. The Nazis occupied the Netherlands in 1940, and everything changed, especially for Jewish families like the Franks.
You can really sense that growing fear in her early diary entries, as the restrictions on Jewish people got worse and worse.
She writes about the changes through the eyes of a child, observing the fear in her community, how everything is changing. It's a reminder of how prejudice can creep into everyday life so subtly.
And then in July 1942, the Franks, along with the Van Dane family, went into hiding in the Secret Annex.
A secret space
Yeah.
behind Otto Frank's business. Cramped, limited freedom, constant fear of being discovered, and describes it in detail, who slept where, how they had to be completely silent during the day. It's almost like you're there. You can feel how small and confined it was.
8 people just living in constant fear. It's hard to imagine what that must have been like.
And that's where the diary is so incredible. She talks about everything, the little details, the boredom, the arguments, even the humor they found to cope. It's all there.
It's those details that make the diary so relatable, even today. I mean, we may not have experienced hiding during a war, but we've all had to deal with difficult people or being stuck inside for too long.
Absolutely. Anne's diary, it's a reminder that even in the most extreme circumstances, we're all still human. We get frustrated, we want connection, we even find ways to laugh.
Yeah, and she had to follow strict rules. There were food shortages. They relied on these black market ration books. And there was the constant tension of 8 people living in such a small space.
She writes about disagreements over food, arguments about personal habits, how her being a chatterbox annoyed everyone.
You can almost feel that claustrophobia,
Yeah.
not just physically, but emotionally too,
Mhm.
being under that much pressure all the time.
And as all this is happening, Anne is changing. The diary becomes this coming of age story, but within this unimaginable context.
Right. Her relationships with her parents, particularly her mother, are changing. And she starts to have feelings for Peter Van Daan, the boy who's hiding with them.
It's fascinating to see her grapple with these universal experiences like first love, but against the backdrop of war and the threat of death.
And then there's how she starts to think about bigger ideas, too. Faith, humanity, what it all means, especially when surrounded by so much suffering.
There's so much insight in her writing. It makes you think about what she could have accomplished if things had been different.
It's really heartbreaking.
Uh,
And as the war goes on, you can feel how the danger increases.
the news from the outside world was getting worse. More deportations, more killings, air raids were intensifying, and then there was a break-in at the annex. Their sense of security was shattered. It really felt like the walls were closing in.
But even then, even with all the fear, she still had hope. she still had her dreams, especially her dream of becoming a writer.
She talks about publishing a book, even joking about calling it the Secret Annex. It's incredible. She refused to let her spirit be crushed.
She found comfort in writing, a way to process everything, to make sense of it all. I love that line. Paper has more patience than people. It's so true.
It speaks to how lonely she must have felt. Even though she was surrounded by people, writing was her escape, the place where she could be herself.
There's another passage. She says, I want to go on living even after my death. It's like she knew her words would have power.
It's almost like a prophecy, and in a way, she achieved it. Her words have touched so many lives. Her story lives on.
Sadly, the diary ends abruptly. August 4, 1944, that's when they were arrested. It leaves you with such a feeling of loss and so many unanswered questions.
It's a reminder that life is fragile and the terrible things that hatred can lead to.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, but we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore. Her observations about the people around her, her thoughts on life and what it all means.
Well, we'll have to pick up with those in the next part of our exploration of Anne Frank's diary.
You know, it's interesting how everyone in the annex, how they all reacted so differently to the war.
Yeah, it really shows how people react under pressure, doesn't it? Like Anne's father, Otto, he seems to be the calm one, the one trying to keep everyone grounded.
He was the steady one, trying to keep things together.
And then you have Mr. Van Daan. Anne describes him as someone who knew a lot about politics, but his predictions were all over the place.
Up and down. One minute he's hopeful, the next he's convinced it's all over.
And Mrs. Van Daan, well, she seemed to be more focused on practical things, like getting fake ID papers.
Right. Even with everything going on, she's thinking about those day-to-day survival things.
And Anne, she sees it all. She writes about how they're coping, the adults, with a mix of annoyance and sharp observation. It's really interesting.
Well, so you can see right through them. It's that youthful perspective. She's not weighed down by experience, so she picks up on things the adults miss, or maybe things they've just learned to ignore.
I love her description of their food cycles, like weeks of just endive or spinach, just that one thing over and over.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? The monotony, the lack of variety, always being hungry, but it shows how resourceful they had to be.
And even then, she still finds humor in it. She talks about rotten potatoes and imitation gravy in such detail, you can practically taste it.
It's that ability to find the light, even when things are so dark. It's part of what makes her diary so powerful.
Yeah, and that strength is there in how she handles her own teenage struggles too, especially with her mother. It's a really complex relationship.
That's where the diary becomes something more than just a historical document. It's a universal coming-of-age story. That feeling of not being understood, those clashes with parents, we've all been there.
She says, I wish I could ask God to give me another personality, one that doesn't antagonize everyone. I think most teenagers have felt that way at some point.
It's that universal feeling of insecurity, but for Anne, it's amplified by the situation. She's stuck.
Trying to deal with all those normal teenage feelings, but living with constant fear, no privacy. It's amazing she found the strength to write at all.
And she never gave up on her dream of being a writer, talking about publishing a book, even joking about calling it the Secret Annex.
It shows how much she believed in herself, that even in those circumstances, she knew her story was important.
And she understood the power of writing, how it helped her process things, find clarity. That line, paper has more patience than people. It's so simple, but so insightful.
It's like writing was her safe space.
Her confidant. The place where she could truly be herself.
Which makes the ending of the diary even more tragic. We don't know what could have been. Her story is cut short.
It's a reminder of how precious life is and the terrible cost of hatred.
So what do you think? What can we learn from Anne Frank's diary? About history, about ourselves?
It's a question that stays with you, isn't it? On the one hand, it's this first-hand account of the Holocaust, a reminder of what happened.
But it's more than that. It's about people. Ordinary people in an extraordinary situation. It's a reminder that history is made up of all these individual stories.
In Anne's story, it shows how resilient people can be, even in the face of so much suffering. She found joy, she connected with others, she had hope.
Her diary is also a warning. A reminder of what can happen when prejudice takes over, when we dehumanize others.
And most importantly, Anne's voice, though silenced, it still speaks to us. It reminds us to be kind, to be compassionate, to understand each other.
It's a powerful legacy. And it makes us think about what we can do to carry her message forward to make sure this never happens again.
That's the challenge. As we continue our deep dive, I wonder what resonates most with you, our listener. What are your takeaways? What questions do you have?
I've noticed that so much of Anne's diary is about trying to understand the people around her.
Yeah, she really gets into their heads, doesn't she?
Uh,
It's like she's analyzing them,
It's like she's using the diary to figure out human nature.
especially in that environment.
Exactly. Trapped in the annex with all these different personalities.
And what's interesting is that she doesn't hold back with her parents either.
Oh, yeah. Her relationship with her mother. That's a whole other layer, isn't it?
She's very honest about how she feels, misunderstood, judged,
That feeling of not living up to expectations.
and which is, pretty normal for teenagers.
Oh, absolutely. But imagine going through that while you're in hiding, with the constant fear of being caught.
It must have been so intense.
And yet she still wants that connection with her mother.
It's that need for love and belonging. It doesn't go away just because your circumstances are extreme.
And she writes about everyone, not just her family. Mr. Van Dane, Mrs. Van Dane, everyone.
She brings them all to life. You can practically see them.
And her opinions change over time, too, as she gets to know them better.
She's realizing that people aren't just one thing. They're complicated.
Which is, pretty mature realization for a teenager.
Yeah, she's growing up fast. And she's very aware of her own shortcomings, too.
She calls herself stubborn, headstrong, even a chatterbox.
But she also sees her good qualities, her intelligence, her curiosity.
She owns it all, the good and the bad.
That's what makes her diary so relatable, that honesty.
She's not pretending to be perfect. She's just being herself.
And it reminds us that even though her story is set during this horrific time, her struggles are universal.
Right, she's still a teenager, figuring things out.
So what does all this tell us? What can we learn from Anne Frank's diary about ourselves, about hope?
It's a powerful story. It forces us to look at the dark side of humanity.
The Holocaust was a horrific event, and her diary is a reminder of that.
But there's also hope in her story, her spirit, her resilience.
She never lost faith in humanity.
Her diary is a testament to how strong the human spirit can be.
And it's a call to action, to fight against intolerance, to stand up for what's right.
To make sure that something like this never happens again.
Anne's voice might be gone, but her words live on. They inspire us to create a better world.
A world where everyone is valued and respected.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Anne Frank's diary. It's a story that will stay with you.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep Anne's message of hope alive.